Today, we're talking about how to shoot with the 70 to 200 millimeter lens. We're gonna cover why people like it, some things you need to know about the lens, and some techniques to improve your photos. Let's get started. Oh wait, this is just a coffee cup. People love the 70 to 200 millimeter lens because of the zoom range. It allows you to get close to a subject that you can't physically get close to, like across a mountain range or across a lake. And they also love the effects that it creates, like sun flare, bokeh, and compression. As we get further into the video, we'll cover these more in depth. Let's talk about some things you need to know about this lens. First up is the shutter speed. So with a 200 millimeter focal length, when you zoom all the way out, you're gonna need to keep in mind that as you get further from your subject and you're zoomed in, the motion of the lens and shakiness of the camera will get exaggerated. So the important thing to do is keep your shutter speed at least at 1/200th of a second most of the time when you're using this lens. You can shoot at slower shutter speeds, but you're gonna have more issues with motion blur. The motion blur is due to that camera shake, so turning on your image stabilization can be helpful. You'll notice that there's mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 does image stabilization in 2 axes. Mode 2 does image stabilization in just 1 axis, which is great if you're trying to pan with, say, a vehicle or a moving subject. It will only stabilize in that one direction. The other thing to know about this lens is the minimum focus distance is usually like 6 to 8 feet, something like that. So you'll notice on most lenses there's a switch which will allow you to switch between focusing on the full range, which is from that minimum focus distance out to infinity, or just from 3 meters to infinity. So if you have a close subject and you're having trouble focusing, check to make sure that you're in the correct range. Usually when selecting a lens, you'll have a choice between f4, like this one, or f2.8. Most of the time we're shooting in outdoor locations where we have an adequate amount of light. If you tend to shoot indoors, go with the 2.8 version because it's a little bit better in low light. The advantage of the f4 version is that it is quite a bit more compact and lighter weight, which we really appreciate since we tend to take our gear out into wild places. Another thing you need to know about this lens is that it's best used with a lens hood. Attaches to the front. It really keeps the glare off that front element and gives you a better image. I would encourage you to use the lens hood most of the time. The only time I don't use it is when it's a cloudy day and it doesn't really matter, and I want to have a little bit smaller profile on my camera. Another important consideration with a zoom lens is that it's important to zoom with your feet and not just with the lens. Zooming with your feet is really important, and it allows you to be more decisive with the focal range you choose. So let's say I want to create a lot of compression. I'm going to put it at 200 millimeters, and then I'm going to zoom with my feet to get the frame that I want. If I want a classic portrait, I might choose more like 85 millimeters and then zoom with my feet to get the frame I want. It's important to choose your focal length and not just zoom in and out until you have the image you want. So now let's talk about some techniques to improve your images. As I mentioned previously, compression is a really cool feature of the 70 to 200 millimeter lens. It really allows you to bring the subject and the background so they appear closer in your image. So that is mountain range that's right behind your subject. It just pulls it forward and it makes it feel like it's right there. So as I mentioned before, compression is a really important feature with this lens. You're gonna get the best compression at 200 millimeters. So in order to get that effect, zoom your focal range to 200 millimeters, and then you can line up your subject so that it's in the same field of view as your background, and it'll make those two appear close together in the image. So the other thing to consider when you're thinking of compression is choosing an aperture that gives you the look you want for that image. So you might choose to shoot at f4 and make that subject really sharp, or you might choose to shoot at more like f11 so you have your background and your subject sharp. Speaking of aperture, the cool thing about this lens is the depth of field it can create. Even the f4 version, which isn't as fast as the f2.8 version, creates beautiful depth of field and bokeh if you keep your subject close and your background far away. It can really blur it out and make it look beautiful. Another favorite thing to do with this lens is to shoot into the sun. Usually a 70 to 200 millimeter lens will just create really nice flare, and in the words of a friend of mine, Ryan Christopher Jones, all backlight all the time. To get a really pretty sun flare, it's often best just to experiment. So you get your subject out in front of you, in between you and the sun, and then just move your lens around and kind of play with that flare and see what effects it can create. We really like this Sony 70 to 200 f4 lens because it creates this beautiful orange glow. It's kind of unique, and I haven't experienced that with other lenses, so you might check this one out. In summary, the most important things to consider when shooting with the 70 to 200 millimeter lens are compression, depth of field, and thinking of how you're going to position your subject in the frame. If you found this video full of jargon, we'll put some info in the description below. For example, we'll put a link to the lens and depth of field calculator that allows you to visualize some of the changes relative to focal length and aperture and how that can create a different visual effect. If you're interested in more info about the 70 to 200, I'm going to put some links below to more content. We're going to be doing a review of the 70 to 200 f4, and we're also going to be doing a comparison of the 70 to 200 f4 versus the f2.8 by Sony. Make sure to subscribe and you'll get notified when those videos come out.